Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Botany Bistro. I'm really excited about our topic today, and I'm so glad that so many of you were able to join live. We've got several new folks, new faces, new names in the house. And so thank you all so much. And for those of you that are returning, we really appreciate your continued support. So my name is Mary Dudley, and I'm the Ecology Education Manager here at the Civic Garden Center. We're located in Avondale, which is the neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we've been around for 80 years teaching people about gardening, sustainability, conservation, and we are putting together this series, this Botany Bistro series, because we wanted to deliver some bite-sized botany and try to get you interested in maybe some new parts of botany that you didn't know about before. There's so much to learn. Even though I did get a degree in botany, I am still learning new things all the time. And so I am just thrilled with being able to do this research and deliver this information to you and start this conversation, which could lead to a number of adventures and new activities for us all. So if you haven't been here before, let me just recap a little bit about what the Bistro is. It is small kind of snippets of deep dives into different areas of botany. So as a newly graduated botanist in my undergrad, I went out into the world and I was like, okay, great. I am trained. Someone will hire me. And then I got a little bit of a rude awakening, realizing that a botany degree is fairly general still. I didn't have floral experience. I didn't have clear horticulture or landscaping experience. I didn't have a lot of lab research under my belt. And so I started to learn more and more about the different areas of botany. And then I wanted to be able to research those more and share those with all of you. In my career, it did take me down a winding path, but botany has always been a big part of my life and has helped me be able to teach others about ways that they can manage their landscape, things that they can do to strengthen their plants and use less chemicals, and also just appreciate the bountiful beauty that's all around us all the time. So right here in Cincinnati, it's a little bit dormant season still, but it's nice and sunny. So it's a beautiful day, and we are seeing lots of things on our grounds. We're seeing crocuses out right now. The daffodils are starting to peek their little leaves up. We've got snowdrops blooming. Winter aconite is out. So please make sure that if you're in town, you come and visit us. Bring the family, walk around, bring your lunch, your dog, and enjoy the several acres that we have here that are just so beautiful, tucked right here in the corner of the city. All right, so that's a little bit about Botany Bistro and the Civic Garden Center. Some things that we've been talking about on the Bistro in past sessions are things like paleobotany, which was our most recent topic, and plant breeding and genetics. We talked about plant pathology, physiology, systematics and taxonomy, anatomy, morphology, and some basics as well. So if you want to catch up on that, all of our archives are available on our website, also on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check out that if you want to go back. And today we're talking about ethnobotany. And so I think I might have said something similar when we did maybe paleobotany thing. Oh, if I just had, several more lifetimes, several more careers available to me, I would want to explore some other aspects of botany. And ethnobotany definitely has a big spot in my heart. I just think that it is very exciting to learn about the way people use plants and include people in the conversation, which is probably why I went into teaching people about plants for my current career. And so every bistro, we have a little bit of lunch. I hope you have a wonderful lunch that you are enjoying right now. For lunch today, sorry, I have a little frog in my throat, but I feel great. And so for lunch today, I've got a nice little chicken orzo cranberry apple salad. Yum. It smells amazing. We've got some carrots in there, some green beans. It's going to be really, really tasty today. It was actually fairly difficult to think of what I wanted to bring to the ethnobotany talk. there's some staple crops that have been eaten and domesticated for many centuries that I could have gone to, some tried and trues, rice and corn. But at the end of the day, you know what? I was like, ethnobotany is about the relationship that people have with plants. And I wanted to have something that just tasted and sounded really good. So today, that's what I'm having. And I hope that all of you are going to fill up your tummies with something great. So our lesson today is going to be talking about the basics of ethnobotany. This is part one of a two-part series. And so this is the 19th session that we have had in the Bistro. And so our next one, our 20th session, will be our wrap-up for ethnobotany. So it'll be part two. So we'll leave a little cliffhanger for you at the end of today. So make sure you tune in with us. The part two will be airing in 2 weeks. That's February 23rd at noon. Right here, same time, same place. And we're going to have a special guest on, one of my good friends, Abby Artemisia, who's the founder of the Wander School and also a published author, is going to come on and talk to us about her experiences with ethnobotany. So that's going to be really special. So please mark your calendar now to join us for our 20th episode on February 23rd. So those of you that are tuning in live, I will give a presentation, and about 12:40, 12:45, I'll finish up my presentation, and then I'll turn on the chat. I'll also allow you to unmute, and you can turn on your cameras. We can have a discussion. So if you have any questions that pop up during your time with us today, please make sure that you jot those down. We would love to discuss those at the end. No pressure. I'm not going to be putting up visuals right now. Everything's going to be auditory. And so you could even just put in your headphones and go for a walk if you want. Do whatever you like on your lunch break. All right. So we usually do have a little bit of homework in between our Bistro sessions. And this week's no exception. So this homework is going to be to tell us about your favorite tea infusion. So we're going to talk a little bit about infusions and what those are and how they differ from tinctures and decoctions. But think about your favorite tea infusion. And so once we define that, I'm sure you'll have no problem thinking about something that you enjoy in that vein. And you can share that with us on social media and tag us at Civic Garden, and we'll be able to continue the conversation. All right, so let's get started for our ethnobotany talk. And so we are going to start this off in the way that was suggested to me. I was talking to several people about how I should present this information, and so we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. And so I would like to acknowledge the following tribes and cultures that lived and inhabited and cultured this land, cultivated this land long before colonization. So we have the Miama, the Kasakia, Osage, Shawnee, Hopewell, and Adena peoples. And so I would really like to thank all of them for their contributions to the field of ethnobotany and how they continue to keep these traditions alive even today. We have so much to learn from our neighbors and those that came before us, and I'm just very, very grateful to acknowledge them. And so our definition of ethnobotany today is that it's the interdisciplinary study of the relationship between people and plants. And so the origins of ethnobotany can be traced back to the very origins of human civilization. Since prehistoric times, humans have relied on plants for food, medicine, fuel, shelter, and cultural practices. The formal study of ethnobotany as a distinct scientific discipline emerged much later. And so it's kind of formalized now. But really, at its heart, it's just people interacting with plants. How have we done that over the generations? And so what I really like about this topic and how it kind of captured me early on was that I was on a trip to the Bahamas in my undergrad. I was taking a capstone course, and it was an amazing opportunity, so I couldn't pass that up. And we're walking around some of these coppices and looking around in the woods, and we're kind of trying to identify all of the species-specific Latin names, right? So we're going genus, species. We're, okay, well, what plant family is it in? We're very concerned with the identification of these plants. And that was the task that we had before us as students. The professors we were with were trying to document large volumes of plants, especially as some of them were being lost to either agriculture or climate changes. And so we felt very strongly in the need for the work to be done correctly, but also, trying to get as much information as we could. And so I really enjoyed that experience. One day we had a local guide come with us, and while the local guide couldn't necessarily just jump out with all of the Latin and scientific names, they were able to give us information about what these plants actually did and what they were used for. And so there is a specific tree that is got a kind of sticky, you don't want to touch it. It's got some dermatitic reaction stuff going on the outside of the tree. We have poison ivy here. They have poison woods. It's called Metopium toxiferum is the name of that plant. And so you didn't even want to touch it. So you really needed to be able to identify that one quickly. But we also had, some people that, had brushed up against it at a previous day. We had some people that had, bad sunburns from going snorkeling and maybe not remembering to put on sunscreen reapplications. And so we had this guide with us that was like, oh, we see that, you could use this herb. We see that you could crush this leaf and you could use this to soothe your skin. And I was like, oh my gosh, this light bulb just went off in my head. I'm like, yeah, I could know every Latin name for every plant ever. And that would be maybe 10% of what, the start of being able to identify these. But the big part of the information that was actually useful is what they're for, whether or not they're poisonous or toxic, how they can be used to ease body aches or, make us more healthy when we're dealing with different issues. And so I just really was happy I had tons of gratitude, basically, in short, for this guide who spent their time with us. And it was kind of close to the end of the trip. And I was like, oh my gosh, can I start over? Can I just hang out with this person and get all of their knowledge? I was very hungry for what they knew. And it was very humbling to kind of have my researcher hat be not the tallest, and be like, okay, let's share the space. It's important for us to be able to identify plants, but it's also very, very important for us to hold on to this knowledge of what these plants are used for. And so early human interactions with plants, we've talked about this in some previous episodes, but we were hunter-gatherers, spoiler alert, relying heavily on our environment for survival, and then gradually learned to identify plants and utilize plants for various purposes, and kind of just were very experimental. What can we use plants for? How can we protect ourselves? How can we make tools? How can we make clothing? What can we do with what's around us? We have these indigenous knowledge systems, and indigenous cultures around the world have developed sophisticated systems of plant knowledge over thousands of years. Typically, this knowledge is passed down orally, generation to generation. And you can also do apprentice work, shadowing, you can work with the elders in the community to gain this knowledge, but it is typically not, has not typically been written down, especially in native languages. And so that is something that a big part of this work is trying to document some of this information. But just because it's not in a database somewhere does not mean that it's not valuable. And so I think that for a long time, there was a thought that ethnobotany needed to fix it, or just create these libraries for all time. And really it's more of a deep breath and an experiential learning that needs to happen. And that doesn't just come from reading one book. It's lifetimes of living around these plants, using these plants, learning from others. And things change, environments change, and we have to be flexible and ready for that. So we'll talk a little bit more about some specific examples as we go forward. So early civilizations in herbal medicine, we have ancient civilizations like in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China, and India developed early systems of herbal medicine just based on their observations of the plant's effects on people's health and well-being. Now, some of these experiments did not go well. And so, within what we know now about how plants affect our bodies, are, hundreds of cases of how that data was collected. And so we just want to be grateful to those who came before us, because they were testing these things out on themselves sometimes, and sometimes the results were not super great. So we're very grateful to them. Even now you'll see, disclaimers on our herbal teas. This is not meant to diagnose anything, and this has not been, this statement has not been approved by the FDA. I'm seeing these things on what I'm enjoying, and I'm okay. I get it. I get the FDA does great things and can approve what they need to approve, but you can't tell me that generations of herbalists are wrong in telling me that maybe I should give this particular tea a try for something that I might be managing. Slippery elm, for example. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, right now my throat is craving a little bit of slippery elm tea. And so I'm really, really happy that we have these options available to us. And with today's global market, you can get, fresh ginseng and your golden seal. You can get all these things just with the click of a button. And so it really is an amazing time we're living in. During the colonial expansion and plant exploration ages, from the 15th to 19th century, we had lots of exploration. We had lots of documentation. We had lots of scientific sharing. They had participant observations that they were starting to do as they emerged into this field of ethnobotany. Like I said, it wasn't quite formalized yet, but they were starting to understand that, okay, we need to be listening to the people that are here. And so we'll talk a little bit more about colonial expansion. Not always great, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but also understand that it does really form the context of where we are coming from today, especially in the region that I am speaking from. And so laying the groundwork for some of these conversations and some of this discourse, this sharing that needed to happen between different cultures as we are, trying to manage just how do we move around a country together? How do we say whose land is whose? Does it need to be owned by anyone? How do we manage these places so that we can share them together? And so that is not an exact science, right? And people are still trying to figure that out, I think, and there are reparations that are needing to be made and some that have been made. But let's talk about a little bit for these methodologies that people are using for ethnobotany and ethnobotanical research. And so typically you'll start by going into the field. And so researchers will go to an area, they'll directly engage with these communities that are growing the ecosystems and the habitats that they are interested in researching more about. And they'll start to observe plant practices and knowledge and how that's passed down. It includes interviews, focus group discussions, informal conversations, and just being really immersed in that cultural context to try to understand all of the different dynamics that are happening, social, economic, ecological factors that are shaping people's interactions. There's also a lot of plant identification documentation that needs to happen. And so that part that I was learning when I was in the Bahamas, still super important. I'm really glad that I know my morphology. But it's just a part of it. So you're starting to document what's around, and the names for things are going to be different. And so, the binomial nomenclature system of taxonomy was created to try to iron out some of the confusions between common names and different languages. But as a lot of this knowledge has been oral, it also is not super translatable all the time. And so I think that there is some really interesting work with linguistics that goes on with this as well. And so they are documenting these plants. They might take specimens for herbarium vouchers. That was something that we were doing when we were in the Bahamas with our professors, so that we could come back and have copies of these plants that were readily accessed. So that, oh yes, this was what we were talking about when we were on the trip, and maybe it ties into the way that something else was being observed. There's also quantitative data analysis, and so we're identifying patterns and trends in plant use over time. And then these are analyzed with statistical methods, such as frequency analysis, chi-square test, correlation analysis, to determine and examine relationships between variables. And these ethnobotanical indices, as they're called, such as the Cultural Importance Index or Use Value Index, are calculated to quantify the significance of plants within that cultural context. So it's can be complicated, but really at the end of the day, it's about getting this information together and making it accessible for future generations. So as we see some of our biodiversity being lost and some of our habitats being degraded, there's a real sense of urgency to try to capture some of this knowledge before it is lost and needed to be rediscovered all over again. There's also collaborative and participatory approaches. And so you would want an ethnobotanical researcher who is going to be involving the local community at all stages of the research process. So we really need to be careful about appropriation and theft of knowledge. It really needs to be a two-way street. And so you need all that permission. You need to have constant, clear communication, making sure that it's working and valuing both parties involved. So you can co-design research projects, you can co-analyze data, you can co-author publications, and this empowers these communities to contribute their knowledge and perspectives, and also that mutual respect that's built. And so building community is something that the Civic Garden Center is all about, and I think that ethnobotany just is made for it. On a personal note, I did work at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden for a few years after my graduate studies. And while I was there, I met Dr. Norris Ledesma, and she's an amazing ethnobotanical researcher, mango grower. She's got hundreds of different mango varieties that she's collected all over the world. She's doing breeding programs, and she's just a wonderful advocate for tropical fruits, but tropical communities as well. And so if you have a chance to go down and look at the Fairchild Farm, I highly recommend it. You can also find some information about her online. But one thing that she had told me when we were working there was that in order to get the communities to be kind of interested or, just kind of collaborating with her and her research team, they would spend quite a bit of time in these communities. They would go to the restaurants, they would go to the churches, they would really immerse themselves in this. And then she would have these kind of fun competitions. And she brought a couple of bikes one time to, I forget what country she was going to, but she had like a bike giveaway. And so she had all these little kids running around getting like their favorite mangoes from the woods, from the forest, and then bringing them all to her and trying to be impressing her so that she would give them the bike. And at the end of the day, I think she did give quite a few away, but I just thought that was so creative, let's have fun. Let's be part of this community. We're not coming in here to change them. We're not coming in here to tell them how they should be behaving. We're just coming in here in the hope of sharing in peace. And so, why did she have to kind of go that extra mile, And so here we are starting to talk about a little bit of ethics. And why are Indigenous peoples reluctant to share their knowledge? And really, it's just we've got a bad track record of not recognizing the sovereignty of people's knowledge and kind of making it seem like our own experiences are superior. And so that's something that we need to be very careful of and kind of check that before we go into a situation like this. So it takes a really unique person to be able to do this research. So we're going to talk about a few ethnobotanical stories here, and I want to make sure that I might make a mistake, but I want to try to say now that I am with intention going to try to use present tense when I am referring to Indigenous peoples. They're not gone. They're still here doing the work that needs to be happening, and there's lots of ways we can support them in that work. And so I'm going to try to keep my present tense, but if I make a mistake, I apologize ahead of time. So outside, just a couple of weeks ago here at Civic, we tapped a maple tree, and we are very excited about collecting that sap. Our season here in Ohio is kind of up and down, a little chaotic, but we did get the bucket on, and so we're hopefully going to be able to get some sap. And maple sugaring and sap collection is not new, and so had been happening before the East Coast was colonized. And so Native Americans have been making sugar from the sweet sap of maple trees for many years. The journals of early explorers, we know that Native Americans had a process for making sugar as early as 1609. And so probably definitely, obviously before that, that's just like when our journals were around. So there's many legends about how maple sugar was first discovered. There's an Iroquois legend that tells how a chief threw his tomahawk into a maple tree one late winter evening. And after he removed it the following morning, the weather was sunny and warm. That sap began to flow from the cut in the tree and drip down into a container at the base. The sap was used to boil the meat for dinner, and the water in the sap boiled away, and a wonderful sweet maple taste was left with the meat. And so, oh my gosh, can you imagine trying that for the first time? If this legend is true, that would be quite a discovery. And the most common, then as winter, brain railed. All right. And so what the Native American groups would do is that as winter started to turn to spring and days got warmer, they would move their entire families into a spot in the forest where there are plentiful maple trees, sugar maple trees, and then establish these sugar camps, which is also something that we are still doing today. And they would do this during the month or so of the maple flow. The most common method of collecting the sap was to make V-shaped slashes into tree trunks and collecting the sap in a vessel of some sort. They didn't have metal pots to boil the sap, and so they boiled the water by dropping hot rocks into the containers that were made out of hollowed out logs, birch bark, or clay. I find that just to be so creative way to do that. And in the early days, the sap was boiled down and made into sugar instead of syrup like we have today, just because it's a little bit harder to store syrup, but the sugar was dry and hard and could easily be packed, had a better shelf life. And so Native Americans of New England used their maple sugar as gifts, trading, mixed with grains and berries. And it does just sound totally delicious. During the heat of summer, they also had a special drink that was made of maple sugar dissolved in water. So all of these really neat things that we are learning about the traditions of just what was going on in our backyard, and we're still trying to keep those traditions alive today. Another study that I looked at had the question of why are plants named after witches and devils in northwestern Europe? And so I thought, okay, got to read that article. It seems really interesting. And so these researchers took time to kind of look at all these different names and the origins for names that are similar to devils or witches. And their study revealed that 425 plant taxa in 97 families are associated with witches and devils in Northwest Europe through their vernacular names. And so I was like, whoa, that's a lot. They found significant associations between names alluding to witches and devils with toxicity and weediness. And this link had been proposed by botanists earlier, but was never quantitatively established. And so the terms witch and devil are likely used in a pejorative way to name toxic and weedy plants, and can also function as a warning for their harmful properties. It's a significant association between plants named after witches and devils and their use for protection against evil as well, including witchcraft. And so not just their harmful characteristics. So I thought that was, just the things people think of, like, why are these plants all named this way? And that's like, okay, well, yeah, they're kind of the bane of our existence. They're making my animals sick. They're making me sick. They're running all over the world. Goodness, I would love to rename honeysuckle to something that not so nice. Tree of heaven, same. No, we should rename these trees and these plants that are giving us so much darn trouble. Another neat study that I read was the Ethnobotany of firewood in Osage Big Moon peyoteism. And this was an observational study that included interviews, lots of groundwork, lots of information gathered and data sorting. thinking about the different types of wood that are used during these peyote rituals. So the ceremonial fire in Osage Big Moon peyoteism is a central element in the practical and ritual conduct of a religious service. The wooden frame church houses that cover Big Moon peyote altars are large spaces to heat and light, placing a premium on firewood that satisfies both of those demands, and has to also be available according to seasonal conditions. And so what they need are coals throughout the ceremony to continuously replenish the coal mounds, which are very important aesthetic features of that religious setting. And so it's also viewed as a sacred entity, so you want to make sure that the fire is going so that it has a visual and spiritual focus for those who are engaging in this ceremony throughout the night. And so their research identified a kind of core set of criteria that would be used to select the best choice of firewood for these purposes. And so their favorite among the Osage peoples is the red oak, and slippery elm and white ash also as substitutes. Fires from these woods produce abundant amounts of heat, light, and long-lasting coals with a minimum of smoke and sparks. And I just think that is cool. That, I mean, everything has been considered, and it's because these traditions have been going on for a long time. This knowledge has been passed down and shared, and so we can stand on the shoulders of those that went before us and say, oh, you know, like maybe we're gonna try a new kind of wood, you know, and maybe it's not quite as good as that red oak that we like. You know, just very neat. Humans are so exciting with their different creativity. And so I thought that that was a really cool way to think about ethnobotany, people and plants in that example. Now let's think a little bit about Native Americans in present-day Arizona and New Mexico, which we think were cultivating sunflowers about 3000 BC. Sunflower seeds were eaten and crushed for oil. We've talked about sunflowers before in our chats, but yes, one of the most early domesticated species that we can find evidence of in the Americas. And the wild weedy populations of the annual species are still in Canada, the US, and Mexico. The wild varieties of sunflower are branched and have typically smaller heads, but that domestication that was happening for generations has produced these large flower heads atop a single stem, and also different oil contents and different varieties. And that's really cool. If any of you like chewing gum out there, the Native Americans taught New England colonists how to chew spruce sap, which was the first commercially sold chewing gum. So that I don't chew gum because I always swallow it. But I bet those of you who do chew gum are probably pretty happy that you're not chewing spruce sap. But hey, maybe we should give it a shot. I don't know, maybe it's great. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the production that was going on in the Carolinas. Example of how our agriculture and the fabric of our culture were changed when we forcibly brought African migrants here and slavery, and how that has impacted our current knowledge of plants and how we use these plants in our daily lives. And so my friend Abby, who's going to be on in 2 weeks, was telling me about how it's this three-legged stool. We have our indigenous knowledge, or the peoples that were here before colonization. We have the colonists that brought over their European knowledge, and we also have our African influences from those who came over forcibly as slaves. And so thinking about how those three different elements have impacted the current ethnobotanical studies that we do here, and how we need to think about our lives in those three frames and who we need to be thankful for and grateful to. And so early colonists in South Carolina did not know how to farm rice. It was enslaved West Africans who had been farming rice for generations that imparted this knowledge, which was taken from them forcibly and profited on without them getting any compensation. In South Carolina and Georgia, enslaved African women were the prime laborers on rice plantations, and women's work included sowing the rice seeds, weeding, hoeing, and threshing. There's also manual milling process of removing those inedible husks so the rice could be consumed. And Carolina's coastal wetland provided excellent farming land for the crop, and the rice flourished. Now, how did they transport these seeds? They're being taken from their homes, and they are put on ships, and they have to go across the Middle Passage, really to an unknown. And so a lot of seeds were actually brought over in the braided hair of these women who had been agriculturalists, scientists, botanists for generations in their homelands. And so they would hide seeds in their hair, and we can be thankful to them for those efforts as we enjoy okra, rice, peanuts, watermelon, black-eyed peas, yams. A lot of these were brought over in secret, and for the vitality of those communities to be able to have something to hold on to that they could still call home. We're going to talk a little bit about modern uses for ethnobotany, but I've got one more really interesting study that I read, and this is still happening today, so I want to make sure I'm using my present tense. And it's in Laos, the People's Democratic Republic, and this was a comparative study of several different ethnic groups, and it talked a lot about herbs that are being used during childbirth and also during prenatal and postpartum times of a woman's life. And there was this concept that I had not heard of before, but I mean, I'm not going to, I would like to try it, actually. I'm not going to say that I am a stranger to wanting to be, just kind of wrapped in warmth. I love taking long, hot soaks with some Epsom salt at home. And so this, I think, is just a different version of it. It's called mother roasting. And this is where a mother is placed on a bed over an open heat source with aromatic medicinal plants. They didn't list all of the plants, and so I don't have a list of plants. But it is an integral part of this postpartum recovery and confinement period that they have in these groups. And the reported purposes are to kind of dry the womb and restore the uterus, and also alleviate some of that postpartum pain. And so we have to bear in mind that most of these peoples are sleeping on the ground, and so they don't have raised beds. So this was actually a purpose-built bed just for this purpose of mother roasting. And so they would kind of put coals underneath the bed with these herbs, and the heat source would be these glowing embers. And this period might be anywhere from 10 to 30 days, depending on whether or not this was the woman's first child, or if she had had several children already. It's kind of less time for the more kids that you have, so I guess you heal faster. Although I don't know, if I've got several other little ones running around at home, I might be like, can I roast just a little longer? just 5 more minutes. And so I thought that was a really interesting concept. And so we have so much to learn from our studies in ethnobotany, and that work is really never done. We discover more all the time. Some notable examples of contemporary applications include ethnobotanical knowledge to inform the discovery and development of new medicines and pharmaceutical compounds. These traditional medicinal plants are screened for their pharmacological properties, which leads to the identification of active compounds that can be used to treat various diseases. The anti-malarial drug artemisinin was derived from the plant Artemisia annua, which is based on traditional Chinese medicine practices. We are also looking into indigenous food plants for their nutritional value and resilience to environmental stressors. Thinking about these traditional agricultural practices such as agroforestry and polyculture, which are being promoted as sustainable alternatives to conventional monoculture farming. We really like to talk about native plants here, and it's kind of this revival of native plants. The knowledge of how to propagate and care for these native plant communities is something that we are seeking and researching and experimenting with. Being able to stand on the knowledge of those that came before is invaluable. I mean, it launches us decades ahead of where we would be without that. And so thankfully we still are keeping that value alive, and we're not the only ones. It's definitely catching on. Thinking about those biodiversity pieces, though, and making sure that we're conserving those, identifying priority areas for protection and sustainable use. Also, thinking about land management practices. This land was managed for centuries before colonization. And so how the land was managed makes an impact on what we can grow here today. And thinking about those management practices and finding out what those management practices were from the peoples that were living here at the time, very important. And these practices can help us preserve biodiversity and collaborate with our conservation initiatives and indigenous communities. We also are, looking at the future and thinking about how climate will influence changes in our agriculture and in the viability of our spaces. And so looking at these traditional knowledge bases and asking the elders and talking to people that have been living in areas for a long time about the changes that they have been seeing, especially with phenology and the appearance of different pollinators, different temperature swings. All of this is really, really important historical data that's going to help us predict where we're going and hopefully make us more resilient and able to adapt. We also have cultural revitalization and sustainable tourism. So if you're planning a trip anytime soon, think about going to an ethnobotanical garden, an eco-cultural trail, maybe a cultural immersion program where you can learn about the preservation of indigenous knowledge and generate income for local communities, and making sure that we are supporting and compensating people who have been sharing this knowledge with us. And lastly, we've got some green tech and thinking about biotech, biomimicry, thinking about how we can use traditional plant materials and extract different compounds from them as we need them. There's no limit really to what we can do. If we have this information, it only helps us. And we should be sharing that and helping all of our other neighbors thrive as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our own traditions. In my family, I have struggled occasionally to kind of place myself into a culture, a tradition. My great-grandparents were European immigrants who were very eager to assimilate into the routines of busy city life on the East Coast. We didn't get food traditions that were passed down to us from either my Irish or English ancestry. And so kind of what I can remember is our celebratory times as a family, going out to eat. Red Lobster was a favorite. And thinking about how I can start to bring some traditions into my own family now that I have children of my own. And wanting to center our traditions around healthy, non-processed foods that are in season and that do good things for our bodies and our brains, make us more healthy. And so through the work of my wonderful husband and my children who will try anything, and lots of friends, family, coworkers, I really feel like those values of understanding the diversity of nature and how important it is to conserve that, and also to be curious and to ask questions and to listen to one another. Those values, I think, are the tradition that we are passing down now. And I really hope that it kind of takes on. And so I think about those values. How did I get those values? Well, my parents loved to take us out to the national parks. We loved to go hiking. I was always encouraged to play outside. My grandfather was very into agriculture, and so he gave me a lot of wonderful lessons. So really I'm living those values and I'm passing them down, even though sometimes I feel like I struggle because we don't have a traditional dish that we've passed down from generation to generation. But we are still trying to live that sustainable lifestyle. And so I think that I can find a lot of comfort in that. And so we're not going to be, there's so much more to talk about. I know I've gotten mostly to the end. I'm excited to ask for any questions here in a minute. I did want to tell you about the differences between infusions, tinctures, and decoctions. There's different ways that people use traditional medicines. So this is my friend Abby's book, Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders. And so she'll be talking a little bit about this book and some things in it. It's a wonderful read, but she's got some terminology here. And so for your homework, so that you know what an infusion is, it's typically going to be a tea that's made by letting plant parts sit or infuse into hot water. And it's usually for more delicate parts of plants, such as leaves, flowers, and fresh fruits. Versus a tincture, which is a concentrated herbal formula made by infusing plant parts in alcohol or other solvents for a few weeks. And a decoction is a tea made by simmering plant parts, usually for hardier parts of the plant, such as roots, bark, twigs, and dried fruits. So I guess we could take a decoction or an infusion for your homework, but please do think about that. How are you using some of the plants around you, whether they're native or they're ornamental, or maybe they do have a strong tradition in your family, and you can think back to those ethnobotanical roots of how people were using that particular plant over time. If you are interested in supporting some more of this work, I highly recommend that you look up United Plant Savers, UPS. That is a wonderful group that is really dedicated to conserving a lot of this herbal knowledge. And another one is Native Seeds Search, and they have been protecting the genetic diversity of lots of different varieties of sunflowers, of corn, of peppers. They're Arizona-based, and so lots of awesome foods out there that they are protecting. And so this topic's all about people, and at the core, it's about listening to each other, learning from each other, and I hope that you learned a little bit of something today.